Start the clock. Thank you, Stephen Duke and SSDP for having me here, and thank you, Asa, for having this debate with me. So let me explain where I'm coming from on the drug issue. I start off with a very simple idea, which is that drugs are here to stay. That there's never been a drug-free society, except maybe the Eskimos because they couldn't grow anything. But basically, there's never been a drug-free society. There's never going to be a drug-free society. And that's a reality that we have to accept. This notion about, zero tolerance, let's do anything, pay any price, bear any burden to make a drug-free society, I think it's time to abandon that idea, and I think more and more people are. So what's my objective? It's to accept the reality, whether we like it or not, that drugs are here to stay. To accept that reality and to learn how to live with that reality so that drugs do the least possible harm, and in some cases, the greatest possible benefit. More specifically, I would define my objectives with respect to drugs and drug policy in two ways. The first is, I want to reduce as much as possible the negative consequences of drug use. I want to reduce addiction. I want to reduce disease. I want to reduce HIV, AIDS, and Hep C. I want to reduce the criminality associated with drug addiction. I want to reduce the suffering that people, individuals, and families and communities go through. Whatever possible to reduce that suffering, that harms of drugs, because all drugs can either be used safely or dangerously to reduce that harm. But that's not my only objective. There's a second objective. I also want to reduce as much as possible the negative consequences of our failed prohibitionist policies, of our failed war on drugs. I'm concerned with addiction and people dying, getting hurt by drugs. I'm also concerned when we live in a country of freedom, which now leads the world in the per capita incarceration of our fellow citizens, which leads the world in the number of people locked up behind bars more than China or Russia. I'm concerned when we're arresting 1.6 million people a year. I'm concerned when we increase tenfold the number of people behind bars on a drug charge from 50,000 in 1980 to 500,000 today. I'm concerned when people are struggling with addiction and they're treated like criminals, especially if they're poor. I'm concerned when we're taking laws that are steeped in racism, as so many of our drug laws are, and we target the enforcement of these laws disproportionately at people of color, black and brown people, rather than other people. When they're targeted young rather than old. When they're targeted and people who can least afford to be targeted. I am not here to argue that every drug should be legalized and sold like alcohol or cigarettes. Not only is that politically a nowhere argument, but I don't think it's the best policy. But I am here to say that we have to reduce the harms of drugs and the harms of our failed drug policies. That it is very much like what we saw with alcohol prohibition 70, 80 years ago. This country passed a national amendment. We don't do that very often, to prohibit alcohol around the country. And people hoped it would eliminate alcohol from the face of our society. And it looked like it might work for a few years, but then it backfired. People started drinking more and more. They didn't drink beer, they drank hard liquor because you wanted more bang for that buck. And then you had Al Capone and organized crime and violence and corruption. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people being killed and blinded and poisoned by bad bootleg liquor that was more dangerous because it was illegal. Young people looking up to bootleggers as role models, jails, prisons, courthouses overflowing. And there was an answer back then, which was to repeal that alcohol prohibition law. John D. Rockefeller, wealthiest man in America, said it quite well. He supported the prohibition movement. He said, I'm a teetotaler, and I've been a teetotaler, and I hate alcohol, and I will never use alcohol. But I have now come to the conclusion that the solution I advocated in the form of prohibition is doing more harm than good. And we have to end the days of prohibition and move into a world of sensible, pragmatic policies to regulate alcohol and its harms. That's what we need to be doing today. Thank you.